Over the last few weeks I've been talking about learning to improvise. And if you're on this journey, then it's worth thinking about this from 4 points of view. There's like 4 dimensions to this, or if you like, the 4 pillars of improvisation. And the last one in particular, which is all around music theory, is hugely misunderstood, and I'll explain why at the end. But it's worth starting with what I consider to be the most fundamental one. So let's start there. So for me, the fundamental skill is being able to turn whatever thoughts, whatever music is going on in your head, into being able to play it onto the guitar. So being able to reproduce the thoughts in your head on your instrument. So it's kind of like applied ear training from that point of view. And this is the fundamental skill that you need when you're learning to improvise. And that's why I picked on this aspect, this pillar, if you like, when I talked about learning to improvise in my first lesson. So there, if you remember, what I did was I got you to either download a backing track and play against that, or play a chord. I just sampled the chord, and then we just explored the pentatonic scale against that chord and started to learn what the notes sounded like against that chord, against that backing track. So that's a really useful first exercise. But there are a whole series of things that you can do to develop this skill as well. So another really good one actually is to start playing songs by ear, and it doesn't matter what. It could be anything. It could be nursery rhymes, you know. Or Happy Birthday. Just anything, you know, theme tunes. I don't know why Laurel and Hardy jumped into my head then, but it could be, it can be anything you want to play, anything that you hear on the TV. Just see if you can play it on your instrument, because that immediately builds that connection between what you're thinking about in your head and what's going on the guitar. Now, as you develop your improvisation skills, you can take this is another stage as well, another really good exercise actually. And this is really good for breaking out of ruts. You'll find as you improvise, you play in the same old licks, in the same old way, playing the same old lines and things, and you want to break out of it. And a really good thing to do is to put a backing track on, put your guitar down and just listen to it. And in your head, imagine what you'd like to play over that backing track. So play it all the way through, but imagine the guitar solo that you would like to play. And then play it through again, but this time pick up your guitar and see if you can reproduce some of the lines that you were thinking about when you didn't have the guitar in your hand. So that's a really good way of sort of connecting you again with what's going on in your head and stopping you just sort of playing the same old motor skills. So that's really good. The other thing I find really useful, especially when you're learning new songs, and there's a guitar solo and you have to reproduce it, what I do is I immerse myself into the song. I listen to it, I listen to the guitar solo. But what I'm doing here is trying to listen to the intent, I'm listening to the mood, I'm listening to what they're trying to do in that solo, I'm listening to the dynamics of it. But what I'm not doing is learning it note for note. I'm just taking the feel and taking that flavour of it. And then when it comes to me playing it for the first time, I'm using that intent and flavour, but I'm playing it using my own techniques and my own style, if you like. But I'm trying to recreate those original dynamics, but using my own licks and things. And again, that's connecting my own techniques with what's going on in my head. And then you can take it that stage further, which sometimes I do, and if there's something in the solo that you really like and you haven't quite reproduced, that's the time that I start working on those little phrases and lines and maybe learn them note for note as well. So that's a really good way of building that mind-guitar connection. Okay, the next pillar, if you like, is tone production. It's not about the notes you're playing, it's about how you play them, how you're approaching the notes that you play on the guitar. It's really interesting. You can hear there's a huge difference between a really competent guitarist and a beginner. They can just play one note and you can hear that this guy really knows what he's doing, whereas this person kind of doesn't. And it's all about the tone production. It's all about how they approach the notes. It's all about how they think about tone production as well. And so it's really worth you working on this right now. So the sorts of things that we're talking about is, you know, from a right-hand perspective, how are you going to pick the note? Are you going to hit the string? You know, there's a whole different way of playing a note from, you know, playing up near the 12th fret. You get a completely different sound to playing down here. So start thinking about it from that point of view. And also from a left-hand perspective, you don't just fret the note, you need to think about what are you going to do with that note. Are you going to apply some vibrato to it? What kind of vibrato do you like to use? You know, on the electric guitar we tend to use what's called transverse vibrato, where we pull the string to one side, and that creates a much larger vibrato. But what it does tend to do is scratch the string on the fret. So if you're playing on the acoustic guitar or on the classical guitar, for example, you can use longitudinal vibrato, where you're moving your finger up and down the length of the string and it's not scraping it against the sides. It's a more subtle technique, but it creates a different sound. Yeah? So it's worth thinking about these things as well. String bending. You're just going to play the note, are you going to bend up to it? Are you going to slide up to it? Yeah? It's worth thinking about these concepts as well. What the thing I really recommend you doing is starting to listen to other musicians, not just guitarists as well. I mean, my favourite type of musician to think about is a singer. Find some singers, or any singers actually, but don't listen to the song. Listen to the notes that they're singing and listen to how they're singing those notes, how they're emphasising those notes, what kind of vibrato they're bringing to it, how they're decorating those notes as well, because that is something that you can bring to your playing. Finally, it's also worth thinking about not just notes as well. Think about textures. You know, like I was doing earlier, I was hitting the strings specifically to create that texture. There are things like harmonics that you can bring out. You can just scratch the strings as well. If you think about how percussive guitarists hit the guitar as well, all of these things can be brought into music as well. And this is why I like to think of music as a series of musical gestures, not just notes, because musical gestures brings in all of these concepts, all of the different ways of making a sound on the guitar and turning it into a piece of music. So that's something to think about as well. Okay, so the third pillar is worth thinking about is technique. And when I talk about technique, I'm talking about developing motor skills specifically, so improving your dexterity on the neck. So this could be through exercises, but it also could be through learning licks and lines and other people's music as well. But you're trying to build your dexterity, you're trying to build your capability on the neck. But the other thing you're doing as well while you're doing this is you're building a vocabulary. So you don't think about necessarily individual notes anymore, but you can start thinking about groups of notes as well. So something like that. It's a cluster of notes. I don't think about this from the point of view of the individual notes. I'm thinking about it as a gesture, a musical gesture that I bring to the guitar. So developing those kinds of lines as well is part of developing a technique. Now, developing technique is kind of seductive from the point of view of the more time you spend on technique type exercises, the better you get at them. So there's kind of a direct relationship with the amount of effort that you put in and what you get out of it, which is really quite seductive, as I say. And that's less true than, you know, some of the other things, that mind guitar or that applied music, ear training that I was talking about to start with is harder to develop. So people do tend to spend a lot of time over technique development as well. So it gets a bit of a bad press from that point of view. But what I find is if you take it in context of these other pillars as well, so if you don't just work on technique without that applied ear training means that when you improvise, you tend to be painting by numbers, you tend to be gluing licks together, you're not bringing your own ideas into the guitar. Or technique without thought about tone production tends to sound dead, it sounds lifeless. It sounds very mechanistic. It doesn't have that human element injected in it. But if you can take technique alongside some of these other ideas as well, then you'll develop as a more rounded musician, and you can bring your technique to bear into the solos that you play, and you create much more interesting solos. From a beginner's perspective, the first technique exercise I like to show is around the pentatonic scale, and that is just ascending and descending in groups of 3. So you're just taking 3 notes and then resetting to the next one. Yeah. And you can go up the same way. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so start learning on those to start with, and then see if you can start to create a little line with them. Just by joining these ideas, these ascending and descending lines. And that gives you a useful little technique, as you can see, that you can start to bring to your music as well. Okay, so the fourth pillar I wanted to talk about is music theory. And as I said, people get this completely wrong, especially if you're self-taught. A very common thing I hear people saying is something along the lines of, I've written this piece of music, or I've written this song, but I don't know if I've done it right or not because I don't know any music theory. And that's completely misunderstanding the point of music theory. Music theory gives you 2 things, or it exists for 2 reasons. One is to allow musicians to communicate with us, to talk to each other or to write music down. So that's the first fundamental reason for the existence of music. So you're not talking to someone and saying, play that chord. Not that chord, the one that sounds a bit like that, but is a little bit different. It's a lot easier to say, play a C chord, or put an E in the bass, and now play an F. Yeah? It's a lot easier to use music theory, music terminology than it is to not. So that's the first reason for the existence of music theory. The second reason for the existence of music theory is to describe what's gone on in the past, to try and give you some understanding about how successful composers have written pieces of music in the past, and to hopefully give you some guidelines or some ideas that you can bring to bear if you want to write something that you want to sound similar to what they've done. So that's the second reason for music theory. It's not to give you a set of defined rules that you must follow. It's purely to give you some guidelines, some information that will help you and will shortcut your own development. So for example, on the guitar, you can make every note on the neck work against every key. So you could, for example, to a beginner, just give them the guitar and say, yeah, play anything, it'll all work if you know how to do it. It's a lot easier if I say, okay, if you're playing in A minor, so there's an A minor chord, there's a couple of notes that work much more easily against this A minor chord than others, and they are these notes. So if you want to just sort of ease yourself into improvisation, then these are a good place to start. Oh, and by the way, this collection of notes is called the A minor pentatonic scale. So if anyone asks you about the A minor pentatonic scale, you know what it is. It's a group of notes that will fit nicely over an A minor chord. Okay, so that's applying music theory. And all you're doing really as you're developing your understanding of music theory is you're taking concepts that other people have found that have worked in the past and finding ways of bringing them into your playing so you can get more sophisticated about the kinds of things that you can do. And it's that whole concept of standing on the shoulders of giants. Yes, you can work all of this stuff out yourself, or you can learn what successful people have done in the past and bring it to bear in your own playing as well. But the fundamental final principle around music is, does it sound good or not? That's your goal, not does it fit music theory or not. Music theory is adapted to support new songs. If someone comes up with a new idea or a new song or a new approach, if it's successful enough, people will invent new theories to explain why that song works or why that music works. Theory is adapted to suit new ideas, new songs, new successful songs. New successful songs are not forced to follow music theory. So do you see how the way around it is? Music theory is not a set of constraints to force musicians to play in a certain way. Music is a set of guidelines that will help composers, but composers can do whatever they want. Okay, so they're what I call my 4 pillars of improvisation. There is learning to connect what goes on in your head into your guitar, so that's kind of applied ear training, if you like. There is tone production, focusing on how you play the notes, not just which notes you play. There is also technique, developing the technique so you can start to play the lines that are going on in your head. And there is music theory as well, which is bringing to bear ideas and concepts that have worked in the past and being able to channel them into your own playing as well. Now, every guitarist, every musician takes each one of these to a certain level, and they'll focus on one more than the other, and that helps to create the unique player that each musician is. But it's worth understanding each one of these 4 to some degree in order to turn you into a well-rounded improviser. So hopefully that's been useful for you, and we'll chat next time. Goodbye.